I was running away from the Mafia with my son, and then my son ran straight to the Mafia boss. The hotel laundry corridor smelled like bleach and damp towels. I held Leo's hand way too tight as we passed the humming machines. My plan was simple. We'd get to the service elevator unseen. We'd leave this city and never look back. Then his little fingers slipped from mine. He ran back the way we came, his shoes slapping the tile. I turned just in time to see him dart around the corner. I froze for one terrible second. I heard a man's voice, low and familiar, then Leo's happy cry. Matteo. I rushed after him, and the scene in the main hallway stopped my heart. Matteo Rossi stood there with his men. A man I didn't know lay on the floor near them, not moving. And Leo. Leo had his arms wrapped around Matteo's leg. Matteo looked down at my son. For a split second, his hard face changed. His shoulders dropped. He put a big hand on Leo's head, so gentle it hurt to watch. Then his eyes found me in the doorway. They went flat and cold again. One of his men, a giant named Luca, started toward me. A witness, a new voice said. A man stepped out from behind one of Matteo's guys. Silas Croft. He was a city official, always had this politician's smile. It was gone now. He pointed a clean finger right at me. She saw everything. You know the rules, Rossi, no loose ends. He said it like he was talking about a budget report. I felt the whole world tilt. Matteo's jaw tightened. He looked from Silas to me and then to Leo, who was still clinging to his leg. I saw the calculation in his eyes. I wanted to run, but my feet were made of stone. If I ran, they'd chase me. They'd chase Leo. Matteo made a sharp gesture with his free hand. Take them, he said. His voice left no room for argument. Luca's hand closed around my upper arm. His grip was like iron. Another man peeled Leo carefully from Matteo's leg. Leo started to cry, reaching for me. The sound broke something inside my chest. Matteo turned away from Silas, whose cold eyes watched it all with satisfaction. He walked right up to me, so close only I could hear. Do not fight, he said, his voice low. His thumb pressed once quickly against the inside of my wrist where Luca held me. It wasn't a caress. It was a signal. Then he turned and led the way down the hall, and we were marched after him. The crush of Luca's grip on my arm still pulsed like a fresh bruise as Matteo shoved me forward. I stumbled into a sterile, windowless room. The only sound was the low hum of a vent I couldn't see. Leo started to cry, a thin, scared sound. I pulled him into my chest and back toward a metal table. Matteo stood by the door, dark eyes, a scar down his face. His white shirt sleeve was stained dark red with blood. His world had almost killed me once. It would try again. I rocked Leo and whispered nonsense into his hair. My own fear was a cold stone in my throat. I could not let it out. Matteo didn't move. He watched us with a face like stone, then he looked at Leo, who was still sniffling. He closed his eyes for a long second. His shoulders slumped. It wasn't anger, it looked like defeat. He should not see this, Matteo said. His voice was low. See what? I asked. My voice was rough. Any of it. He ran a hand over his jaw. He looked tired. The blood, the men, me. You brought us here, I said. I did. He didn't look away. It was the only choice. He took a step closer. He was still several feet away. I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. The red stain on his sleeve was a map of violence. I didn't step back. Leo had gone quiet against my shoulder. Matteo's hand lifted slightly, like he wanted to reach out. Then it fell back to his side. He just looked at us. There was a question in his silence I couldn't answer. The smell of his blood was still stuck in the back of my throat. The private elevator doors slid shut, sealing us in a cold white light. I held Leo tight. He was shaking. Matteo stood beside us, staring straight ahead at the polished doors. His shirt was ruined. The numbers above the door began to drop. My mind raced. The garage would be public. There would be people or cars or a chance. I felt a stupid, wild spark of hope. I would run. I would scream. I would do anything. The doors opened with a soft chime. The concrete garage spread out, dim and echoing. My breath caught. I tensed my legs, ready to bolt. Then I saw her. My sister Elise stood 10 feet away. Her face was pale and confused. 2 large men in dark suits flanked her. One of them had a hand on her arm. The spark inside me died all at once. It left a hollow, cold space. Elise saw me. Her eyes went wide with panic. Clara, she said. Her voice was thin. Matteo stepped out of the SUV first. He moved between me and the men holding my sister. Get in the car, he said to me. His voice was low and flat. He didn't look at me. He was looking at the man holding Elise. I walked forward on numb legs. A black SUV sat idling nearby. The rear door was open. I climbed in, pulling Leo onto my lap. The leather seats were cold. I watched through the open door. Matteo walked over to Elise and the men. He stopped close to my sister. He said something to her I couldn't hear. Elise flinched. Then he turned to the thick-necked man. Matteo's whole posture changed. It became rigid and sharp. "They disappear," he said. The words were clear and final. The man nodded once. Matteo turned and walked back to the SUV. As he bent to get in, his hand brushed my wrist where he had pressed his thumb before. It was the same spot. This time his fingers just grazed it. They were cold. He pulled the door shut. The sound was heavy and final. We sat in the sudden quiet. Leo whimpered into my shirt. I looked over at Matteo. He was staring out the window as the garage lights slid past his face. He looked tired. The sharpness was gone from his eyes. For a second, he just looked like a man who had lost something. I didn't know what to say. I looked away. The rest made sense. What he had said to make Elise flinch didn't. Real quick, if you're here for the ruthless mafia boss who patches up a kid's scraped knee, hit subscribe. Trust me, the contradictions only get deeper. The cold imprint of the SUV's leather seat still clung to the backs of my thighs like a brand. We were in the safe house. I blinked against the sterile, fluorescent glare of the main living area. My eyes watered from the sharp smell of fresh paint and chemical cleaner. Leo was asleep on a stiff beige couch. Matteo stood by the window. He had changed his bloody shirt for a dark gray one. He looked tired. The lines around his eyes were deep. "I need to speak with you," I said. My voice was too loud in the empty room. I walked toward him. I stopped a few feet away. "Let us go. I swear we won't say a word. You have my son. That's all the leverage you need." He turned from the window. He did not look angry. He looked resigned. That scared me more. "It's not that simple," Matteo said. His voice was low and flat. "Silas Croft knows you saw him. He put a price on your head, a big one." He watched my face. I felt the blood drain from my skin. My mouth went dry. "If you walk out that door, you're a target. Leo is a target. Your sister Elise is a target." I shook my head. The movement made me dizzy. "I'll go to the police. I'll tell them everything." He let out a short breath that wasn't a laugh. It was the sound of a man who had heard that before. "The officer who took your statement this morning?" Matteo asked. He took a single step closer. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes that wasn't about tactics. It was regret. "He works for Silas. Your statement is already gone. Your bargaining chips are worthless." The truth of it hit me like a physical blow. My knees felt weak. I had nothing. I was nowhere. The regret in his eyes when he said the officer's name. I wasn't going to like the answer. My hands still trembled with the useless energy of that final, failed plea. Later, I was in the bathroom, leaning against the locked door. The chill of the tiles seeped through my socks. I listened to the heavy quiet of the safe house. Leo's sniffles were the only sound. He sat on the closed toilet lid, clutching his knee. The scrape was not bad, just red and raw. The door handle turned, then stopped. I flinched. "Open the door, Clara." Matteo's voice was low through the wood. He did not sound angry. He sounded tired. I knew I had no choice. I turned the lock. He stood there, filling the doorway. He had changed his shirt. In one hand he held a small white box with a red cross. He did not look at me. He looked at Leo. "Let me see," he said. His voice was different. It was not an order. It was almost soft. He knelt on the tiles in front of my son. He moved with a careful slowness. He opened the first aid kit. He took out an antiseptic wipe. He held it up for me to see. "This will sting," he told Leo, "but it is clean after." He waited for Leo's small nod. Then he cleaned the scrape. His hands were very steady. They were broad, with clean nails. They were the hands that had gripped my arm in the SUV. Now they dabbed a boy's knee with a gentleness that made my chest feel tight. Leo did not cry. Matteo placed the bandage with precision. He smoothed the edges. He did it all in silence. Then he stayed there, kneeling. He looked at the bandage on his own work. For a moment, his shoulders dropped. The controlled strength went out of them. He just looked like a man who was very tired. "You are good with him," I said. The words were out before I could stop them. He did not move. "I had a brother," he said. The words were flat. He had not planned to say them. "He was smaller. He got hurt often." He stood up then. He was close to me in the small room. I could smell the clean soap on his skin. I could see the faint line of his scar in the bathroom light. He looked down at me. His dark eyes were unreadable. I saw something in them, though. It was not a threat. It was something else. It was a kind of loss. He lifted his hand. For a second, I thought he might touch my face. His fingers came close to my cheek. I stopped breathing. He did not close the distance. He let his hand fall back to his side. He looked at me for a second too long. I did not know what it meant. Then he stepped back. He picked up the first aid kit. He turned and walked out of the bathroom. He left the door open behind him. That question, why he had almost touched my cheek, sat there like something unfinished. What do you do when the man holding you captive is the only one who seems to care if your son gets hurt? The antiseptic smell was still on my fingers. It was sharp. I stood in the kitchen of the safe house. The only sound was this low, steady hum from the old fridge. Leo was asleep upstairs. Then I heard Mateo's voice from the next room. He was on the phone. I knew I shouldn't listen. But my feet stayed right there on the cracked floor. I heard every word. "Tell me, Elise." His voice was flat. Hearing my sister's name was like a cold stone dropping in my stomach. I could hear her voice through the phone, tinny and fast. She said Silas's men were everywhere. She said there was pressure from Mateo's own people. She said they were calling me a liability. I knew she meant me. Mateo listened. He didn't speak for a long time. I saw his shadow on the hallway floor. His hand was clenched at his side. Then his voice dropped so low I almost missed it. "They are not a discussion." There was a pause. I heard Elise argue. Her voice rose, frightened. Mateo cut her off. "The safe house location stays closed. You protect it with everything." He sounded final. He ended the call. He walked into the kitchen then. He looked right at me. I hadn't moved. He knew I'd heard everything. His face was hard. The scar on his jaw looked pale. He looked tired in a way that went right down into his bones. I was angry. I was scared. "You used my sister," I said. My voice shook. "You made her a part of this." He didn't deny it. He just leaned back against the counter. And then he did something that shocked me more than if he'd shouted. He looked away from me first. "Elise came to me," he said. His words were careful. "She saw Croft at the city records office. She was smart. She knew it was wrong." He rubbed a hand over his mouth. "I put a man on her for her own safety. That man called tonight. He said Croft's people were at her door." I felt the air leave my lungs. Mateo watched my face. "My people got her out. She is safe at another property." He said it like it was a simple fact, and I understood then. The regret I saw in his eyes before, it was for this. For pulling my family into his world, for making my sister a target. "I have to go to her," I said. "It wasn't a request." Mateo shook his head. "You cannot. She is my sister. And that is why you must stay here." He pushed off the counter. He stood close. I could see the dark stubble on his cheeks. I saw the real worry there under all the control. "Silas wants you silenced. He will use her to find you. My order stands." He was protecting her by keeping her away from me. He was protecting me by keeping me here. The wrongness of it twisted inside me. I had no good move left. I looked down at my hands on the cold counter, and I made a decision. "Then you tell me what to do," I said. "Tell me how to make this stop." The echo of his command was still there in my jaw, a tightness I couldn't shake. I found myself standing in the safe house's main room. The only light was a dusty amber stripe falling across a worn rug. I heard the front door open and shut. Mateo walked in. He placed a thick manila envelope on the small table. His dark eyes were fixed on some point beyond me. He looked like a man carrying a weight he'd decided not to put down. "You think this is about holding you," he said. His voice was flat. "It is not. It is about a man named Silas Croft. He knows you saw the shooting. He owns the officer who took your statement." He pulled a single photograph from the envelope. He slid it across the table toward me. It showed a man in a suit shaking hands with a police captain. "Silas trades in favors," Mateo said. "He makes problems go away. You are now a problem." I picked up the photo. My fingers were cold. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say this was his world, not mine. I looked at Mateo. A small muscle flexed near his temple. It was the only sign he wasn't as calm as he seemed. He was waiting for me to understand. I put the photo down. "I don't care about your rival," I said. My voice sounded thin. "You should," he said. He didn't move. "Because he does not just threaten you. He finds the seams in a life. He pulls them." He placed another paper on the table. It was a typed report with a time stamp. "Your sister, Elise Tanner, 2 hours ago, 2 detectives brought her in for questioning. They asked about your whereabouts. They asked about your mental state." My breath caught, and that's when it hit me. This was why he had almost touched my cheek before. He saw the danger coming for everyone I loved, and for a second he forgot to be my captor. He was just a man watching a storm roll toward a house. The room felt very small. The amber light on the rug seemed dim. I thought of Elise's face, scared in a bright room. I thought of Leo asleep down the hall. Mateo was still watching me. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I stood there in the space between my old life and this new one, and I made my choice. I looked straight at him. What do we do? The cold dread he'd planted in my chest now felt permanent. Like a lead weight. I stood at the kitchen sink, my palms flat against the cold porcelain, and I stared at the stove clock. It was past midnight. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. I'd been standing there a long time. My mind just kept circling the same terrible facts. My sister was in danger because of me. My son was sleeping in a strange bed. And the man who put us here was sitting in the next room. I finally turned the tap and washed my hands. The water was very hot. I let it run until my skin was red. This was what I'd decided. I would go and ask him why. I found Mateo in the small living room. He was sitting in a worn armchair, not on the sofa. He had a glass of something dark, but he wasn't drinking from it. He just turned it slowly in his hand, watching the liquid slide up the sides. He didn't look up when I walked in. I leaned against the doorframe, keeping the space between us. "You don't have to sit in the dark," I said. My voice sounded too loud. "The light hurts my eyes after a certain hour," he said. It was such an ordinary thing to say. It threw me. I expected a command or a dismissal. He finally looked at me. In the faint light from the hallway, his face seemed softer, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He didn't look like a man who held all the cards just then. He looked like a man waiting for a headache to pass. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Really, you could have handed me over. It would have been cleaner." He was quiet for a long time. He set the glass down on the floor beside his chair. "Cleaner isn't always better," he said. His voice was low and even. "My father had a saying. A child's world should be made of small rooms, a home, a school, a park, safe, known walls." He looked toward the hallway where Leo slept. My rooms were never small. They were warehouses and parked cars and rooms over bars. By the time I was Leo's age, I knew the smell of a police station. I knew the sound of a man being hurt in the next room. He said it all in that same detached tone, like he was reading from a ledger. That childhood was forfeit. It was the price of the life. Leo's doesn't have to be. I took a step into the room without meaning to. The space felt different now, charged with a history I could almost touch. He stood up, not toward me, but just to his feet. We were only a few steps apart. I could see the tight line of his shoulders under his shirt. He was close enough that I could have reached out. The way he'd looked at me just then wasn't about the threat. I didn't know what to do with that. He didn't move any closer. He just held his ground, and I held mine in the quiet dark of that safe house. Something hung in the air between us, heavy and still. The cold weight of his words still sat like a stone in my stomach. I found myself standing in the dark living room, my bare feet cold on the floorboards. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. I knew Mateo was still in the house somewhere. He hadn't left. I walked to the window and pushed the curtain aside just an inch. Outside, the black SUV sat under a dim streetlight. I let the fabric fall back into place. My fear had changed shape while I wasn't looking. It was no longer a wild animal. It was a cold and quiet plan. I turned from the window. I found him in the kitchen. Mateo stood by the sink, his back to me. He was staring out the small window above it into the black yard. The overhead light made the gray at his temples more pronounced. He didn't turn around when I stepped on the creaky floorboard. He just said my name. It wasn't a question. "Clara." His voice was flat. I stopped in the doorway. I made my own voice steady. I said his name back. "Mateo." He turned then. His eyes were dark and tired. He looked at me for a long moment. He was waiting for me to beg or cry. I did neither. "You told me what Silas wants from me," I said. My hands were still at my sides. I kept them open. My statement gone, my silence, my son hidden away. I took a small step forward. The linoleum was cold under my feet. But that's just the surface. That's him cleaning up a mess. I watched his face. A muscle moved in his cheek. He said nothing. "So I have a question," I said. The words felt dangerous in my mouth. "What does Silas want from you?" Mateo went very still. His hand, which had been resting on the edge of the counter, went white at the knuckles. He didn't look away from me, but his eyes changed. For a second, he looked like a man who'd been punched in a place he forgot was soft. He blinked once slowly. He looked down at his own hand on the counter. He made a soft sound, almost a laugh, but with no humor in it. "That's the first smart question anyone has asked me in a long time," he said. His voice was low. It had a rough edge to it. He pushed away from the counter. He walked past me into the living room. I followed him. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the dim room. He ran a hand through his dark hair. He finally looked at me. His expression was unreadable. "What he wants from me is simple," Matteo said. His words were careful and clean, like he was laying out knives. "He wants a dockyard map. He wants ledgers. He wants a shipping container that doesn't belong to him." He paused. His eyes held mine. "And he thinks using you will make me give them up." The sharp pressure of his stare still clung to the back of my neck like a cold hand. His apartment smelled of lemon polish and gun oil. He stood by the window, his back to me, a dark shape against the city lights. I watched the slow rise and fall of his shoulders as he breathed. He had a gun on his hip and blood on his hands. I knew both things were true, yet my own hands were steady now. I'd stepped into this room without meaning to, but I wouldn't leave without the truth. "You're a Rossi," I said. My voice didn't shake. "That wasn't just a story about your brother, it was about you." Matteo, the Mafia boss who held my life in his hands, did not turn. "Names are dangerous things, Clara." "Elise found my husband's files," I said. I pushed the words out. They were the only weapon I had left. "She was investigating Captain Vance. Your people took her, didn't they?" The light from the hallway cut across his face, and I saw it. The deep lines beside his mouth. They had nothing to do with anger. They spoke of a weariness that went all the way to the bone. That was the detail that wasn't tactical. It made my chest ache. He looked like a man who had been holding up a wall for a very long time. "Silas Croft has her," he said. The name was flat, final. "He's a corrupt official. He uses police work to settle scores. Your sister's investigation threatened a deal he made with your husband. A deal involving my docs." The confirmation was a physical blow. I had to put a hand on the back of a chair. The wood was smooth and cold. "You let him take her," I said, "to protect your business." "To keep you and your son alive," he said. His voice was low and rough. "Silas thinks you are my weakness. He thinks using you will make me give up what he wants. The map, the ledgers, a container at the docks." He paused. "If he knew I told you this, he would kill her, just to prove a point." I moved then. I walked right up to him, into his space, until I could see the flecks of lighter brown in his dark eyes. I didn't touch him. "Then we get her back," I said. "You and me, before he proves his point." My throat ached from the words I'd forced through my clenched jaw. The only light in the kitchen came from the green numbers on the microwave. It cast a sickly glow over the cold granite. I didn't hear him come in. I just felt the air shift. He stood in the doorway, a shadow against the dim hall light. He didn't turn on the overhead. He just leaned against the frame. He watched me for a long time. I kept my eyes on my hands, flat on the counter. "You should sleep," he said. His voice was rough. "I can't," I said. The word was flat, final. He moved then. He crossed the kitchen to the sink. He didn't look at me. He filled a glass with water from the tap and drank it all in one go. I saw the way his throat worked. He set the glass down too carefully. It made no sound on the stone. That careful control was a crack. He was holding himself too tight. "You think I don't know what this does to you?" he said. He wasn't asking. He stared out the dark window above the sink. "You think this is just business for me?" I didn't answer. I waited. "My mother," he said. The words were quiet, like they surprised him. "She tried to shield me. She failed. I remember the sound of her crying in another room. I remember the smell of the car they put us in." He turned his head just slightly toward me. "Failing at that. It isn't a failure, it's a terror. It lives in your bones." The confession hung in the dark kitchen. It was the thing he thought I'd already seen, the personal history that made his hands gentle with my son's knee. The reason he had taken us, not just for the map or the ledgers. My breath caught. He took a step toward me, then he stopped. He was close enough I could see the fatigue etched around his eyes, close enough to touch. The space between us felt heavy and warm. My heart beat hard against my ribs. I saw his hand lift just an inch from his side. He looked at my face, he looked at my mouth. I felt a pull, deep and quiet, then he let his hand fall. He took a slow step back. He broke the look. He turned his face toward the window again. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. The unspoken thing sat between us, solid as the counter under my hands. Everything else I could deal with. Why he had looked at my mouth before he turned away was different. The tight ache in my jaw lingered like a bruise. I stepped onto the cool concrete of the balcony just as the first pale light began to bleed across the rooftops. The city below was a silent, gray maze. I heard the soft slide of the glass door behind me. Matteo stepped out. He stood beside me at the rail. His hands rested there, palms down. I saw a faint tremor in his left thumb. It pressed into the concrete over and over. He had not slept either. "The car will be ready in an hour," he said. His voice was rough from the long night. "You and Leo will go to the coast house. You will not be found there." "I'm not going." The words were flat. They hung in the quiet air. He turned his head toward me. His eyes were dark and hollow in the dawn light. "This is not a discussion." "You heard me," I said. I faced him. My own hands were steady now. "You hide us and Silas Croft keeps my sister. He uses her to get to you. Hiding just gives him more time to hurt her. Going after her is suicide," he said. "You are not equipped for this world." My husband dragged me into this world. The anger felt clean and sharp. He hid something for Silas in that shipping container at the docks. It wasn't drugs or guns. It was people, wasn't it? Mateo went very still. The tremor in his thumb stopped. He looked away from me, out at the waking city. His pause was too long. When he spoke, his voice was lower. It was almost a whisper. "Yes." The confirmation was a physical blow. I had guessed, but hearing it was different. My stomach turned. I put a hand on the cold rail to steady myself. "So my husband helped traffic people," I said. The horror was a dull weight. "And Elise found out. That's why Silas took her. To bury the proof, and to break you. And if you walk out there, he will break you too." Mateo finally looked at me. His controlled mask was gone. I saw raw fear in his eyes. It wasn't for his empire. It was for me. I didn't know what to do with that. "He already broke everything," I said. "Hiding didn't stop it. I am done being a liability you have to protect. I am going to find my sister." I held his gaze. "You can help me, or you can get out of my way." He studied my face. He was looking for doubt. I gave him none. Something in his posture shifted. The resignation left his shoulders. He gave a single, slow nod. "Then we find her together," he said. "It wasn't an order. It was a pact. But you will follow my lead, every step. As long as the step leads to Elise." The first real sun cut across the balcony. It caught the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He wasn't a safe man. But in that light, he looked like the only solid thing left in a collapsing world. He hadn't chosen me. Something else had put us here. I chose to stand beside him now anyway. And here's where it gets crazy. One thing kept pulling at me. It was what Clara had said under her breath when she thought I wasn't listening. The cold balcony railing left an ache deep in my palms. Elise's front door, when I finally found it, felt warm against my knuckles as I raised them to knock. Mateo stood beside me. He gave a short shake of his head and pulled out a key. The lock turned with a soft click. The apartment inside was dark. It smelled of stale coffee and Elise's lavender perfume. My foot came down on a loose floorboard right over the threshold. The creak was loud as a gunshot in the silent room. I froze, my eyes darting toward the dark hallway. Mateo grabbed my arm. He pulled me hard behind the couch. A key rattled in the front door lock. The door we had just used. It was not Elise. The door swung open and hit the wall with a thud. Two men stepped inside. I saw their silhouettes against the window. One was tall and thin. The other was built like a barrel. They were Silas's men. The barrel-chested one flicked on a flashlight. The beam swept the room and stopped on a lamp by the couch. The shade was tilted from our quick entry. "Someone's been here," the tall one said. His voice was low and rough. I held my breath. I pressed a fist to my chest. Mateo's hand tightened on his gun. His other arm pressed against my back, holding me in place. The flashlight beam moved toward us. It lit up the carpet inches from my shoes. Then a third silhouette appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had come through the fire escape. He was blocking our only other way out. We were trapped behind the couch. The man in the kitchen raised his arm. I saw the dull gleam of a gun. Mateo met my eyes. His face was all sharp angles in the shadows. He gave a sharp nod toward the bedroom door behind us. The man in the kitchen fired. The sound was enormous. Plaster exploded from the wall above our heads. Mateo shoved me toward the bedroom. He turned and fired 2 shots back toward the kitchen. Then he was moving with me. A second shot came from the living room. I saw Mateo jerk. A dark patch bloomed high on his shoulder. He had put himself between me and the bullet. He didn't make a sound. The tall man rushed around the couch. He was right on us. I acted without thinking. I grabbed a heavy bookend from a shelf by the door. I swung it hard at his wrist as he raised his gun. The metal connected with a sickening crack. He yelled and the gun clattered to the floor. I kicked it away. Mateo was at my side, his good arm supporting his weight against the doorframe. "Go," he said through gritted teeth. We stumbled into the bedroom and toward the window. I pushed it open. But what I didn't know at the time was this. What Clara had said under her breath when she thought I wasn't listening would come back, and it would change everything. The copper smell of Mateo's blood wouldn't leave my nose. I leaned against the cool bathroom sink in the safe house. My reflection looked broken in the cracked mirror. Mateo sat on the closed toilet lid. He had taken his shirt off. I could see the neat, dark hole high on his shoulder. The medicine kit was open on the sink. I pressed a fresh towel hard against the wound. My hands shook from the drive over. His face was a tight mask of white. He didn't make a sound. The only noise was the hum of the old light overhead. It flickered sometimes. I saw his muscles tense under my hands. The cash, the gun, the scars, none of it was normal. But this was. When I poured the antiseptic, he flinched, a sharp, full-body jerk. Then he laughed. It was a weak, pained sound that caught in his throat. He looked away from me fast. He stared at the floor. His ears turned a little red. I had never seen him embarrassed before. "First time I got shot, I cried," he muttered. His eyes were closed. He hadn't meant to say it, I knew that. My hand stilled for a second on the bandage roll. I saw it then, not the boss. A young man, maybe Leo's age in a different life, scared and hurt. He opened his eyes, they looked tired. "My mother found me. She promised me I'd be safe." He stopped, that was all. My face was very close to his bare shoulder as I taped the bandage. I could feel the heat from his skin. I could feel his breath on my hair. It was steady but shallow. I leaned back instead of forward. My own breath hitched. What was this feeling? It wasn't fear. It was a heavy warmth in my chest. I busied myself cleaning up the bloody towels. My touch on his good arm, guiding him to stand, was gentler than I planned. I put it away and got on with things, but my own breath catching at his warmth refused to stay put. The warmth from his blood had dried into the lines of my palm. I walked into the main room of the safe house. It was dim. The only sound was the low, steady hum of an old refrigerator. I carried the files from Elise's apartment. The damp paper felt heavy. I spread them out on the scratched floor under the weak overhead light. Mateo watched from the narrow bed. He was propped against the wall, his shirt stiff with dried blood. I traced the columns of numbers in the first ledger with my finger. My frown got deeper with every page. "That symbol there," he said from the bed. His voice was rough but clear. He pointed to a small mark next to a large dollar amount. "That's not Rossi business. That's Croft. My family doesn't use that mark." He looked down at his own hands on his knees. They were clean, capable hands, but he looked at them like they belonged to someone else. I felt a strange twist in my chest. He told me he broke a promise to his mother. I wondered what that promise was. The numbers started to blur in front of my tired eyes. The silence stretched, filled by that refrigerator hum. "I wanted to be a mechanic," Mateo said softly. He wasn't looking at me or the files. He was staring at the opposite wall, at a water stain shaped like a country I didn't know. His admission just hung there. A small, honest truth he hadn't meant to give. I stopped reading. I just looked at him. The man who ruled a violent empire but once dreamed of fixing cars. I didn't know what to say. I needed his knowledge to crack the codes. I took a page over to him and knelt by the bed. Our shoulders almost touched as I pointed to a line of entries. Neither of us moved away. The paper rustled between us. He took it from my hands to see it better. His fingers brushed against mine. A brief, warm touch. I remembered what he'd muttered under his breath back in the apartment when he thought I couldn't hear him. He had said, "Not her too." Now, looking at the proof of Silas Croft's reach in these pages, I understood. He was trying to keep a promise he made to someone else, a long time ago. The evidence in the ledger was clear. Payments from city funds, authorized by my late husband, routed to shell companies I now knew belonged to Silas. Vance wasn't just corrupt. He was Silas Croft's primary enforcer. He had used police resources to make people vanish. The horror of it was a cold stone in my gut. Mateo's eyes met mine over the damning page. We were locked in this together now. My throat was still tight with shock, a raw ache that made swallowing hurt. I merged into the evening crowd at the transit station. The air smelled like damp wool and stale pretzels. The plan was simple. I would pose as a scared civilian with information on Mateo Rossi. I had to make Captain Vance believe I wanted to deal. My heart hammered against my ribs as I spotted him. He stood by a newsstand, a tall man in a police trench coat. He looked exactly like his file photo, but colder in person. He saw me and walked over. We stood near a vending machine that hummed loudly. "Ms. Vance," he said. His voice was flat. "You're a long way from your new friend's protection." My stomach dropped. He knew everything. I don't know what you mean, I said. My own voice sounded thin. I have information. You have a sister, he cut in. Elise Tanner. She's with us now. She's being very cooperative. The world tilted. The noise of the station faded into a dull roar. I was horrified. My skin went cold. My feet felt numb on the dirty floor. He watched my reaction. His eyes were like chips of glass. Here are your new terms, he said. He didn't raise his voice. You deliver Matteo Rossi to Silas Croft. You have 48 hours. Bring him to the old cannery on the West Pier. If you don't, or if you warn him, we will send Elise back to you in several boxes. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. I thought I would be sick. I turned and walked away. My legs moved on their own, pushing through the crowd. I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out of the open. I needed to find Matteo. The thought of him, of the quiet way he had listened in the car, was the only solid thing left. I remembered the exact feeling of my own breath catching when he'd leaned close to point something out on the map. Now, that memory felt like a lifeline thrown into a storm. I had to reach him before Vance's men did. My lungs still burned from running. My key scraped in the garage lock. The air inside tasted like damp concrete and stale motor oil. I leaned against the cool metal door after I closed it. My breath came in short, sharp pulls. Matteo Rossi, the man I was supposed to betray, stood by the black SUV. He was just a silhouette in the dim garage light, one hand pressed to the bandage on his shoulder. He didn't speak. He just watched me. His stillness was a question. I saw the way his free hand hung at his side, the fingers loose but not quite relaxed. It was the hand that had pulled away from mine so fast in the car. I understood it now. It wasn't disgust. It was a rule. A line he had drawn for himself. Touching me was a complication he couldn't afford. I have to tell you something, I said. My voice sounded thin in the big space. I know, he said. His voice was quiet. Your face at the station. It was the same look my sister had when they told her about our father. He said it flat like it was just a fact, but he'd never mentioned a sister before. I told him everything Vance said, the 48 hours, the delivery, the choice. I said the words to the oil-stained floor. When I looked up, he had moved. He was closer now, standing near the SUV's fender. The space between us felt small. I could see the tight line of his mouth. He wasn't looking at the threat. He was looking at what the threat did to me. This is how he works, Matteo said. His words were low and clear. He doesn't come for you. He comes for what you love. He makes you hand over your own soul. He took a half step forward. The garage light caught the tired lines at the corners of his eyes. This isn't business anymore. This is for you, for Leo, for your sister. He was so close I could see the dark stubble along his jaw. I could feel the warmth from his body. Neither of us moved. The unspoken thing hung there, heavy and real. Everything else I could deal with. What he meant when he said this is for you was different. Stepping into the tactical room, the low electric hum of a dozen surveillance feeds vibrated in my teeth. Matteo stood with his good shoulder braced against a map-covered wall. He was tracing a route with one finger. The air was dry and smelled of hot electronics. I walked to the long table where Elise's files were spread. My side ached where I'd hit the floor during the shooting. The ledgers from my study, Matteo said without looking up. His voice was flat. They matched the shipping codes Elise highlighted. Silas is moving something through the South Docks tomorrow night. He finally turned. The harsh light from the monitors caught the sweat on his temple. It was the only sign his injury was bothering him. He looked at me for a second too long. I didn't know what it meant. It's the only time he'll be exposed. Vance will be with him, I said. My hands were steady on the map. He said to deliver you. If we attack the docks, he'll know I didn't comply. He'll kill Elise. The words were stones in my mouth. Matteo pushed off from the wall. He moved slower than usual. He stopped across the table from me. We don't deliver me. We deliver the ledger pages to Vance's crew. Proof their boss is skimming from Silas. They'll turn on him. The chaos gives us a window. He placed a single sheet of paper in front of me. It was a photocopy of a bank transfer. It's a diversion. While they eat each other, we hit the holding location here. He tapped a point on the city map. It was an old water treatment plant near the docks. We have no man you can trust, I said. We have each other, he said. The simple statement hung there. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. His eyes were dark and focused on mine. For a moment, I saw the boy he must have been before the family business took him. It was a flicker, then gone. He reached for a pen and his hand stilled mid-motion over the map. He stared at the spot where Elise was likely being held. Clara, he said, and his voice dropped, becoming almost rough. If this goes wrong, It won't, I cut in, afraid of what he'd say next. He gave a short, quiet nod. He picked up the pen and drew a final, decisive circle on the map. The bond between us registered then, a silent pact made over evidence and desperation. We were an unlikely team. He slid the map toward me. Memorize it. We move in 3 hours. Whatever came next, why his hand had stilled before he finished the circle, was the part I hadn't figured out. My palms still stung from the sharp press of Mateo's signet ring sealing our pact. In the hushed study, the only sound was the dry rasp of my fingers on the leather chair as I sat. The plan was set, but my mind would not settle. I looked across the wide desk at Mateo. He was studying a map of the docks, his injured arm held stiff at his side. A single lock of dark hair had fallen across his forehead, softening the sharp lines of his face for just a moment. I pushed back from the chair and walked to the bookshelf. I scanned the rows of legal books and ledgers. One spine was worn smoother than the others, a deep green leather. I pulled it out. It was heavier than it should have been. I opened it back at the desk. The pages were not for business accounts. They were filled with childish drawings in bright crayon and dates going back years. There were notes in a careful script about school events and doctor visits. I turned a page and saw a photo tucked inside. A young boy with Mateo's serious eyes smiled next to a Christmas tree. "That is not for the plan," Mateo said. His voice was quiet from behind me. "Who is he?" I asked. I did not turn around. He was silent for a long time. I heard him shift his weight. "His name is Leo. He is my nephew. His father was my brother." His words were flat, like he was reading a police report. Silas had him killed 7 years ago over a disputed shipment lane, a lane that moved perfume and silk. I turned then. Mateo stood by the window, his back to me. His shoulders were rigid. "The boy was 4, he said. "The rules say a child that young cannot be held accountable." Silas did not care about the rules. He finally looked at me. His eyes were not hard now. They were just tired. Everything I built after that was for him, to make a world safe enough for one child. I understood then. The safe house, his fury, his code. This wasn't about territory. It was a fortress built for a boy. All my anger at his world just melted away, leaving this cold, sick feeling in my stomach. Elise had found Captain Vance's corruption. Vance worked for Silas. Silas, who killed children. My sister was a target because she uncovered a truth about a man who had no lines left to cross. I put the ledger back on the desk. My hands felt too heavy. Everything else made sense. But what Clara had muttered under her breath when she thought I wasn't listening? That didn't. The memory of Mateo's final, desperate grip still lingered in the bones of my right hand. I crossed into Leo's room. The air smelled like clean linen and crayon wax. The boy was already asleep. And Mateo Rossi, the Mafia boss, was sitting on the edge of the mattress, carefully tucking the blanket around his nephew's shoulders. I stood by the door. I didn't move. He hadn't chosen me. Something else had put us here. There was a difference. He moved slow and precise. He smoothed a wrinkle from the blanket with the flat of his hand. He did it again and again. His usual controlled strength was gone. His fingers trembled just once against the cot. He stilled his hand and left it there. He was looking at the sleeping boy's face. His shoulders dropped in a way I'd never seen before. It was a complete and silent defeat. He stood up and turned toward me. He didn't try to hide his face. The lamplight caught the wet shine in his eyes before he blinked. He walked past me into the hallway. I followed. We stopped a few feet apart by the window. He spoke without looking at me. His voice was low and rough. My brother used to sing to him, a stupid song about a boat. I can't remember the words. I watched his profile against the dark glass. He was giving me a piece of his grief. It was an honest answer he never meant to give. I felt a pull in my chest, a warmth that ached. I wanted to reach out. I kept my hands at my sides. The space between us felt charged with everything we couldn't say. The silence was heavy and full. "We find Elise tomorrow," I said. It wasn't a question. He finally looked at me. His dark eyes were just tired. "If we move, Silas will see it. He'll use her to get to you. He'll use you to get to me." He lifted his injured arm slightly and then let it fall. It was that same aborted motion from before. He hadn't finished the circle around Leo because he knew he couldn't close it. He couldn't promise safety. He was showing me why. That question, what Clara had said, sat there between us like something unfinished. I finally reached my car parked along the estate's outer wall. The only sound was the wet rustle of leaves in the cold, black air. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door. The click of the latch was too loud. I sat there with my hands on the wheel. The map from Mateo's study was folded inside my jacket. It felt like a stone against my ribs. I saw the headlights first. They cut through the dark from the main garage. The black SUV moved slow down the long driveway. It stopped near the gatehouse. Matteo got out from the driver's side. He stood under the security lamp talking to one of his men. His posture was straight, but he held one arm close to his side. I knew the wound from the apartment still hurt him. He finished talking and looked back toward the house. He didn't look at my car. He stared at the window of Leo's room for a full 30 seconds. His shoulders lowered just a little. Then he turned and got back into the SUV. He drove through the gates alone. I waited until the red taillights vanished. I started my own car and followed from a distance. I kept my lights off until I hit the public road. The map in my jacket seemed to burn. I knew where he was going. He was moving Leo to a new safe house. He thought I was asleep in my room. He thought I trusted his plan. My hands were steady on the wheel, which scared me. I should have been shaking. I was going to the docks alone because I had to. Silas had a lease. Vance had given me a deadline. I couldn't wait for Matteo's war. I couldn't risk Leo being a target any longer. So I drove into the night away from the only man who could help me. The docks were a maze of shadows and chain link. I parked a block away. The air smelled of salt and rotting fish. I took the map and got out. I walked toward the high fence. A single security light buzzed overhead. I unfolded the paper. Matteo's handwriting marked a specific container number. I heard a car engine approaching slow from behind me. I turned. The black SUV rolled to a stop. The driver's door opened. Matteo stepped out. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired. His eyes found the map in my hand. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. His expression was empty. That was worse than anger. The map's stolen paper still felt like a cold, guilty slab against my ribs. Inside the rusted shipping container, the air was thick and greasy. It coated my tongue with the taste of stale diesel and rot. I pressed my ear to the cold, corrugated wall. My own breathing sounded too loud in the cramped dark. Then I heard her. My sister Elise's voice came from the next container over. It was slurred and thin, like someone had drugged her. She was talking to herself or to no one. "A girl," she mumbled. "He killed a girl, Matteo's sister, not his brother, his sister." My hand slapped over my mouth. The metal was slick and cold. I knew about Leo's father, I knew about the song, but a sister? Someone was always watching, and Silas had seen her. My heart was pounding so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Elise's voice dropped to a whisper. I pressed closer to the wall. "A girl," she said. The words were clear. "He killed a girl and he made her disappear." It washed over me, cold and sick. Elise wasn't talking about herself. She meant Matteo's sister had witnessed something. My own sister had dug up that truth. Heavy footsteps crunched on gravel outside her container. The whispering stopped. A key rattled in the lock of her door. The sound echoed. I slid down the wall until I sat on the damp floor. My whole body shook. Did Matteo know I was here? Did he know what Elise knew? Guards started talking in low tones about a morning transfer. I curled my knees to my chest. The tears came then, hot and silent. In that moment, I finally understood. His war wasn't just business. It was for a sister, too. One thing kept pulling at me. Did those footsteps stop at my container? The taste of rust was still in my mouth. The SUV door slammed shut behind me. The smell of bitter coffee from the dashboard made my stomach turn. We were moving fast. The driver was a man I didn't know. Matteo sat up front. He didn't turn around. The only sounds were the road and the heater. My own breathing was too loud. Matteo's phone buzzed on the seat. The screen lit up his face. He read the message. His shoulders dropped just a little. He let out a slow breath that fogged the window. He didn't speak. He just stared at the phone like it was something heavy. Then he put it down very carefully. He looked at his own hands. He rubbed the side of his thumb against his palm, over and over. A slow, grinding motion. I saw a clean bandage taped across the back of one hand. His fingers looked strong, but right then they just looked tired. He was thinking about something that hurt. I could see it in the tight line of his mouth. "It's done," he said. His voice was flat. "Leo is safe. No one followed the transport." He said it to the window, not to me. It was a report, not a comfort. But his next words were softer, almost lost. "I should have told you from the start." He didn't say what. He just shook his head once. His fist came up and pressed against the cold glass. He didn't hit it. He just leaned his forehead against his knuckles and stayed like that. The convoy took a sharp turn. My shoulder bumped the door. We were close in the small cabin. I could see the precise cut of his hair against his neck. I could see the slow rise and fall of his back as he breathed. He was right there, but he felt miles away. He was carrying everything alone. He finally sat back, his head resting against the seat. He looked at the roof of the car, his eyes open but not seeing the road. The silence between us was full of everything we weren't saying. The cold from the vehicle had settled into a hard knot in my chest. The Prud'hon docks hit me with the shriek of a crane and the stink of rot. I crept along a rusted container, my shoes slipping on wet planks. My eyes scanned the numbers painted in peeling white. A heavy hand clamped over my mouth from behind and yanked me off my feet. I kicked back, my heel connecting with a shin. A second man, one of Silas's, grabbed my arms. They dragged me into the open yard between stacks of shipping boxes. Tires screamed on wet asphalt. 2 black SUVs smashed through the chain-link gate. Mateo's men poured out, guns raised. The dock erupted into shouting and the rack of guns being cocked. Silas Croft himself, in a ruined suit, yanked me against his chest. He used me as a shield. The cold ring of a gun barrel pressed into my temple. "Drop your weapons, Rossi," Silas shouted. Mateo stood by his open car door. Went completely still. The dawn light showed the stark white of his skin. He looked at me. For a terrible second, his eyes weren't a boss's eyes. They were just a man's, wide with a fear I'd never seen in him. I knew then. He had a gun on his hip. He had blood on his hands, but he would let Silas kill him before he risked my life. His men held their fire, waiting. Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. I looked straight at Mateo. I made my choice. "Container 7B, I yelled, my voice raw. "C'est valise." I gave him the last thing I had to give. I gave him my trust. I stopped struggling. My shout hung in the damp air. Mateo's head gave a single, sharp nod. He didn't smile, he didn't speak. He lifted his right hand, fingers spread. It was a silent signal. Half of his men broke away, melting into the maze of containers toward the south line. He kept his own gun trained on Silas, on me. His raised hand was perfectly steady. But why he'd lifted his left hand, not his right? That wasn't going away. The burn of the shot I'd fired still vibrated in my bones. I came to a stop beside some splintered pallets. The air was thick with the smell of burning rubber. Mateo pulled me behind a steel shipping container. Gunfire cracked from 2 directions. I could see the door to 7B. My sister was in there. A fresh wave of bullets hit the container wall above our heads. It sounded like angry hail. Mateo's shoulder pressed against mine. I could feel the heat of his body through my jacket. His face was pale, but his hands moved with a steady, quick purpose as he checked his gun. "They have the south line," he said. His voice was flat. "My men are pinned." I saw it then. A single drop of sweat traced a clean line through the grime on his temple. It was a small thing. It meant he was scared, not for himself, for what came next. That detail, the clean line on a dirty face, made my chest ache. I had to know everything before we died here. I grabbed the front of his coat and pulled his face close to mine. The noise was too loud. I had to shout. "Why your brother?" I demanded. "Why did Silas kill him? Tell me the real reason." He looked at me. His dark eyes held a terrible weight. "Leo's father found the bank transfers," he shouted over the gunfire. "Vance was on Silas's payroll. My brother was going to the feds. Silas had him killed in his own driveway." He said it fast, like pulling out a knife. "Your sister found the same ledger. She disappeared because she was right. She was a good person who saw the truth." I understood then. This wasn't a business war. It was a burial. He was trying to bury the truth that kept killing people. "You used me," I shouted. My voice broke. "You used my search for her to force Silas into the open." He didn't deny it. He lifted his left hand and placed it over mine, the one still clutching his coat. His right hand still held his gun, aimed around the container's edge. His left hand was the one he used for promises, not for fighting. The gesture was bare and simple. It was an answer. I stayed because that hand, covering mine, was the only real thing left in all the noise and the smoke. I did not let go. My throat burned raw from shouting. Inside the shed, the only sound was a steady drip, drip, drip from a rusty pipe. He leaned against a dusty workbench. Mateo Rossi had a smear of dirt across his cheekbone. He was looking at the blood on my sleeve. He didn't ask about it. He just pushed off the bench and came over. His fingers were careful when they touched the torn fabric. The graze was nothing. The way he looked at me just then, I didn't know what to do with that. He pulled a clean cloth from his pocket. He poured a little water from his canteen onto it. The air in the shed was cold and smelled of old motor oil. His hands were steady as he cleaned the cut, but his breath hitched once. It was a small, broken sound. He tried to hide it by turning his head. I saw the muscle in his neck jump. He was staring at a patch of greasy floor like it held a ghost. "His name was Marco," he said. The words were quiet. They weren't for me, but I heard them. "My brother. The last time I saw him was on a dock, not this one, but like this. He pressed the cloth to my arm. I didn't build this life to be like my father. I built it to be strong enough to end it, the whole cycle. I watched his face. He didn't look up. I knew you were using me, I said. My voice was hoarse. I came anyway. I saw the man who bandaged my son's knee. He went still. His hand stayed on my arm, holding the cloth. We were close enough that I could feel the heat from his body. I could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He didn't move away. I didn't pull back. The space between us felt heavy and warm. It was full of everything we had lost and everything we couldn't say. We reached the open container. The damp, splintered wood of the threshold gave way under my boot. Elise was there, huddled against the steel wall. Her eyes were wide and unfocused. She flinched when I touched her shoulder. The sound of a slow, mocking clap came from behind us. Silas Croft leaned against a stack of crates. He held a gun loosely in one hand. His expensive suit was torn and stained with dock filth. "A touching reunion," he said. His voice was too calm for a cornered man. He looked at Matteo, who stood rigid beside me. "You see, Clara, he used your love for her as bait. He let her suffer to draw me out." He shifted his aim between us. "I can give you justice, a clean end for him. Your sister goes free, and this ends tonight." He didn't look at Silas, he looked at me. His eyes were dark, completely still. There was a cut on his forehead. A single drop of blood had dried above his eyebrow. He didn't speak. He didn't try to explain. He just waited. And I remembered the man who knelt to fix my son's bandage. I remembered his confession, right here on this same cold dock. Silas was offering me a world without monsters, but I knew now. The monster wasn't the man standing beside me. I looked at Elise's terrified face. I looked at Silas's smug one. I thought of Leo, safe because of Matteo's order. I thought of Marco, dead for knowing too much. Justice wasn't a deal you made. It was a choice you made. I took one small step to my left. It was a tiny movement. But it meant everything. It cleared the line between Matteo and Silas. I didn't say a word. My silence was my answer. Matteo's arm came up, steady, final. The gunshot was a single, deafening crack inside that metal box. Silas fell. The sound echoed, then faded into a ringing quiet. In that bloody silence, I went to Elise. I helped her stand up. My hands were firm on her arms. She leaned into me, shaking. Then I turned. I walked to where Matteo stood. He was staring down at the body. I didn't touch him. I just stood beside him, amid the wreckage of the container and the whole damn night. He finally looked at me. His breath left him in one long, quiet sigh. He reached out. His thumb pressed once softly against the back of my wrist. It was an apology, and a thank you, and a promise, all without a single word. That question, the one about why his thumb trembled when it pressed against my wrist, it sat there between us, like something unfinished. Real quick, if you've ever had to choose between two terrible options, hit that subscribe button. You know the kind of silence I'm talking about. So, let me ask you. When the line between the villain and the hero blurs, what's the right choice? Is it the one that saves the most people, or the one that lets you sleep at night? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories where the only way out is through, make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you in the next one.